Welcome to the St. Macrina Center occasional gatherings. Today we are beginning a series that we will be doing over the next 6 months or so on particular words. These are words that are significant within the Eastern Christian tradition, and for that reason, within the Christian tradition. They're words that sometimes come to us from the Greek language, sometimes have echoes with Hebrew. And we want to walk into these words and how they've echoed down through the various church fathers and spiritual mothers in our tradition. And also to explore a little bit how these words address us today in our contemporary world. So I'm delighted that our colleague Andrew Bingham is going to kick off this first of the series, reflecting on the two lovely words that we have in the Christian East, the apophatic and the kataphatic. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Yes, we'll be talking about kataphasis and apophasis today. These terms which are rich and yet kind of strangely configured in some of our minds. The thinking today is drawn from the ongoing seminar first on Maximus and then on Gregory Palamas that we are also doing with the St. Macrina Center. So our focus, what are we addressing? We're thinking of something like a stance or a stamen, that which supports flowering, flourishing. Or maybe we could think more like a cast of mind, like mindset or way of thinking, but an emphasis on cast of mind. Cast as in cast forth, place before. Cast as in fishing. You cast a line to see what will be drawn forth. Or even cast like medical alignments that you put on your arm to realign the muscle, the energy, the flesh. A cast of mind. Stance, cast of mind. We also use the word disposition. Disposition is very good. Disposition, which means moving through the position, moving through the placedness of your thought, of your stance. Disposition kind of means casting through stance. But overall, what we're interested in here is a mode of response to creation, a whole way of being that responds well to the gifts of creation. How do we respond? How is our response phrased? Dostoevsky says we must feel ideas, not just ponder, but feel ideas pressing into our whole self, our whole soul. And the word for perception or apperception does generally mean that. It means to sense with the whole person, or apperception, to thoughtfully sense with the whole person. So we're also trying to gather a way of, as it were, becoming alert from head to toe. Now, in this wonderful book, The Roots of Christian Mysticism, which is a gathering of texts and then some elaborations of Orthodox mystical texts by the very fine writer Olivier Clément, I'm going to read a tale from the desert, which he quotes on page 144. It conveys very well this sense. Abba Lot came one day to see Abba Joseph and said to him, "Father, I keep my little rule to the best of my ability. I observe my modest fast and my contemplative silence. I say my prayers and do my meditation. I endeavor as far as I can to drive useless thoughts out of my heart. What more can I do? The elder rose to answer and lifted his hands to heaven. His fingers looked like lighted candles, and he said, "Why not become holy fire? Why not become holy fire?" WHOLLY. Why not become holy fire? I love that. That's one of my favorite things written down. It reminds us that we need to gather the elements of our being and the ultimates of our being. We need to focus not just on what seems grand or final, but on what seems modest and even unremarkable in a sense. So our focus is how to respond with the whole of our being to the gift of creation. How can we gather the whole of our being? It's not gathered via action or via idea, but in a way of phrasing it, it is gathered in terms of movement or kinesis. I use those words interchangeably, Greek kinesis, but movement works as well. And it's curious to me that two of the thinkers in our tradition that stand out as prominent in our day and are being focused on, Origen and Maximus, both locate movement or kinesis at the center of existence. So Origen begins stasis, then kinesis, then genesis. Maximus turns it around, genesis, kinesis, and then ever-moving repose or stasis. They each have kinesis as our lot. And I thought, okay, fair enough. Even though Origen begins and ends with disincarnation, and he's looking for a recovery of some kind of paradise or something like that, he still sees movement, so it's agreeable. Maximus begins and ends with the incarnation, with the fulfillment or the fullness of our being. But both claim kinesis as our own form of experience. We both know and experience in terms of movement. Movement. Movement evens things out. If everything is in movement, everything's in play. And so our sense of prominence or importance or significance shifts necessarily. To see meaning in terms of movement, our meaning in terms of movements. What does this mean? Well, if movement is the meaningful horizon of our being and of everything, we must think in terms of movement and its fullness, not movement and a kind of abstract opposite which we know only in terms of movement itself. So we're not thinking of beginnings and ends. Those are already conditioned by our knowing in movement. Now, we thought of the term phrase, or to phrase, phrasing. Phrasing means relating in terms of beauty or drawing near. Phrasing is a term meant to encompass meaningful movements, meant to encompass the meaning of movements. Phrase itself indicates movement in a way that statement or saying or utterance doesn't necessarily. And our phrasing ought to draw us into simple meaning. Simple meaning. So our phrasing is of the elements common to life. We're not seeking rarefied vocabulary, which then we kind of spin into some kind of thing. We're talking about the stuff of which we're made. Now, to think of meaning and movement for a little bit more, or language particularly and movement. Both the roots of a word and the way it flows in a sentence, both involve movements. The kinesis of roots or etymology, often English and the other languages of which I have a smattering of knowledge, often the root of a word is an actual physical gesture, physical movement. seizing, turning, taking, circle, right? A concrete act or event. And then it moves further in association. So even the smallest bit of a word is moving. Language also has meaning in its flow, because a word alone, anything alone, has no meaning. Meaning moves in relation. And so our words only make sense or nonsense together. Simeon, the new theologian, drew this to our attention the other week when we read, "The good is not good when not done in a proper way." Things make sense together. There's roots, but there's movement. And rooted openness or open rootedness is a pretty good definition of tradition. Rooted openness or open rootedness. The elements of movement, of kinesis. All moves, all of creation flows, all relates, and each movement of the all matters, especially if it's somehow foundational. Our sense of foundation, like our sense of prominence, shifts once we enter into the realm of movement. But to note too, St. Basil the Great, in his work on the Holy Spirit, emphasizes the movement of conjunctions and prepositions and syllables. He goes to the heart of language and says, we need to pay attention here to this movement here. Maximus, the Confessor in the Ambigua, also focuses on the movement of language, but here he's more focused on concentration and the horizon. But all movement on every level of language is important. And this is the one thing we have to have in mind. A turn of phrase is important. Conjunction is important. Prepositions, we've looked a lot at prepositions in our seminar, and conjunctions is important. And even syllable, the very heart of uttered language, means two lips coming together. Syllable, movement, the movement of two lips. So movement is at the heart of our meaning and at the heart of how the tradition understands itself. And there are two modes of movements that I want to explore here. One wouldn't confine movement to only two modes, as it were, but here we are emphasizing two modes of movement, direct and circular. Direct, outwards, and circular, within. But these movements, outwards and within, are properly, well, rather, since our person, our being, is properly at peace, movements, even inner movements, don't negate or overrule each other. They're in harmony with each other. This idea of a direct movement and a circular movement is drawn from Dionysius the Areopagite. We read it in Gregory Palamas the other week. The direct movement is a kind of movement unto, movement for the sake of. The circular movement is the movement of concentration, of drawing near within. But they are as of one movement, both direct and circular complement each other, and they belong together. They're unified, they're not different. But how are these two movements as of one movement? Well, the language of logos and tropos provides this clue. We could ask, what is our own? What meaning belongs to our own? What is the meaning of the gift of our created being? We don't make it up, right? Our own, we're taught, is his own. We are as Christ. Our mode of life, our tropos, our incarnate existence, is shared with Christ. So our own is as his own. But the meaning of our existence, the logos of our existence, is also given by Christ as a gift. All of creation bears his logos. And so our form, our tropos, is as his own, and our meaning is of his own. So we are as and of Christ's very own. And we hear this in the liturgy, where at a certain point, the phrase, thine own of thine own, is uttered. That's what this refers to. An offering of God's own, us, as his own, unto and of his own. So this language of logos and tropos, Christ is all in all. His logos permeates creation. And his logos is the logoi, the little logos, of each element of being, including us. This is articulated by Maximus, but taught within the tradition. And so the logos of Christ, the meaning of the gift of our being, and the tropos of Christ, the blessing of the gift of our incarnate being, both form our own. We are as his own form, and of his own meaning. He assumes our form, our nature, and our personhood as his own, to reveal that we are of his own. And so this clarifies a kind of apparent paradox of Christian movement, Christian kinesis, the movement outwards and the movement inwards, or in slightly different language, the movement of ecstasis, standing forth and out and unto, and the movement of hesychia, the turning within in stillness. These two fundamental movements are of one. Ecstasis, the outward of the stasis, the moving out from the stasis. It reminds us that even stance or stasis involves movement. Ecstasis means to stand out, and then to stand forth, and then to stand unto. The biblical phrase, here am I, forth, out, unto. Here am I. Or one could put it in a slightly more philosophical way, as Bakhtin did. A does not equal A. The principle of identity never works with a human being. But that's standing out, standing forth, and standing unto. And then we have the circular movement, the hesychia, the stillness or the quiet concentration of our hypostases. And we learn that even stillness is informed by movement. It's a kind of movement. Maximus, the tradition, makes this clear with ever-moving repose. The logos of Christ is in all, and the tropos of being human is Christ-given as well. This means the movements unto another person, means movement unto our own. Because what is our own? Logos is at the center of them too, and it's their own, but his own. Ecstasis, movement unto, also becomes a form of movement within. And interestingly enough, as a kind of minor point, the word tautology can help us here. Tautology of something's own logos, to after logos, right? Of one's own logos. It indicates a kind of circular, or as we'll hear in a minute, a kind of dwelling with. If our own is confined to itself, then tautology means identification, and that's death. But if our own is of and as his own, then tautology means the kingdom of heaven is within you. you go in order to meet the whole world. And so tautology here becomes a kind of circular concentration unto one's own. Okay. The movement outward is also the movement inward. The horizon of our movement outward and the movement inward are both transformative. Our own finds its fullness, its whole beauty, as his own and of his own. And so, the friend or stranger who brings his own, God's own, to us in encounter, blesses and transforms us, not negates or confines us. In other words, where we end, right, at our limits is transformation, not negation. And so this is it's put simply, but it can be difficult to grasp. Form means horizon, and horizon means transformation. Form means horizon, and horizon means transformation, not negation. Okay. So, if movement is at the heart of all meaning, then all identification becomes meaningless, a form of nonsense. If the fullness of form means transformation beyond its own as his own, all negation becomes unnecessary and a form of delusion. Now, this deserves much more space, negation, but just briefly here. The impulse for negation often means a lack of readiness to face the thing. And so we begin to fear, and so we try to strike it down instead of have us strike it down. Even double negation, which doesn't cancel something in the world for our own gain, but says, is not that. It's a double clearing. Just leaves us with emptiness. It doesn't actually give anything. And so when we say something is, we don't phrase it in terms of is and is not. What is this? It is not this. Is it this or is it not? No, we turn it in we phrase it in terms of the fullness of is and the transformation of what is. Is modulated by as and of, not by not. And so the fullness of the fullness of the gift of being, means that we may speak of is and more than is. If this is this, but it more than is. Creation is beautiful and more than beautiful. And yet we have to be careful not to be caught in the shadow of our own projection, right? Because if we say something and more than, we still know that. And so we begin to say something is and more than is and more than is. We're pointing to something which is transforming in front of us. This is the language of form and horizon and transformation. And it's difficult because we're trying to phrase plenitude. We're trying to phrase bountifulness. The gifts of creation are endless. And so we're striving to gather that which perpetually exceeds our gathering. And as we are gathering the gifts of creation, we are gathering ourselves too. Just like when we are phrasing the meaning of tradition, we are also being phrased by living that tradition. So phrasing is not just something we do with language. It's something that is done with us through experience. Our being is phrased. Our own is as his own and of his own. This means that our being is in synergy with the theos, with the deity, synergy. And so the flow of our being, the movement of the meaning of our existence, is both our own and his own, mine own and thine own. Our meaning and our beauty are greater than we can know because of synergy. Now, synergy begins with obedience, with our obedience. And obedience just means listening in the direction of, just that, listening in the direction of. That's all it means. In obedience, our being is formed in the image of Christ. We become conformed with him, right? Conformation, formed with. And here, as we become more Christ-like, we become transformed. So here, conformation means transformation. It's an amazing truth of the tradition. Conformation means transformation. We become godlike. Now, so the movement of synergy begins in obedience, moves on to conformation, and then becomes transformation. Transformation. Go back to this word obedience for a moment. It means, etymologically, it means to incline one's ear in the direction of, or to listen towards. It's amazing how we can mistake that word. So it doesn't mean giving up freedom or being confined by the word of another or blind adherence. None of that is in Christianity anywhere. To listen towards, to listen unto, to be unto. Our being is responsive. Our being means a form of listening, of hearkening. We hearken when we are attentive. The word attentiveness is very close in Greek to the word for prayer. And we read frequently in the tradition about watchfulness or vigilance. That's attentiveness. But attentiveness also means attunement, the calibration of our ear or our being and soul. In response, we need to calibrate our response. Now, sometimes we calibrate our response via images or figures, metaphors. Metaphor, another word of movement, bear a cross, to carry over. Maximus says we are carried in life, we are carried and we carry, right? We carry and we are carried. And then sometimes we get carried away. But metaphor is what carries. So we have the desert as metaphor for the clearing of Christ, or the monastic cell as a metaphor for the simplicity of Christ, or fire as an image of consummation, right? Or light, an image of the immediate presence of the theos, the energies of God. We become attuned to these sorts of images. We can also calibrate our forms of movement. In the seminar, we often talk of dwelling and calling, dwelling and calling, dwelling as human beings together and then living in the calling of the divine. And we get this language from ideas like the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, or the phrase, I will dwell with them and be their God. Right? Dwelling is a kind of circular movement. We're dwelling together. And then calling, the calling of the divine, the call of God. That's more of a direct movement. Calling unto meaning. But we know that the circular movement and the direct movement mean the same thing. So dwelling means calling, means to live that calling. And to live in that calling means to dwell here fully. The word calling is also good because it echoes out of the Greek word to kalon, the good or the beautiful. And there's a sense of that which calls to us in there too, that which draws us near. These things, desert, cell, fire, light, dwelling, calling. These aren't images that then we apply to truth or icons that we deduce, the idea of. Form is not divorced from meaning, nor is meaning possible without some kind of form. Bakhtin says form is that which allows meaning to be seen, to be perceived for the first time. There's no disincarnate meaning. And so another intuition that we began with in a seminar, and which has remained, is that aesthesis and noesis, the aesthetic and the noetic, are not opposed, thanks to the person of Christ. The aesthetic and the noetic are not opposed. The aesthetic word is as, this as that. Being as creation is blessed. Blessing creation as beautiful and meaningful is holy. And then noesis or noetic, this movement signaled by of. Of has to be the most mysterious word in the language. But noesis, we are as Christ and we are of Christ too. Of. Of names the noetic relation and generally indicates an apophatic relation. Now, regarding the question of aesthesis and noesis, we in the tradition are not troubled by form or movement as the Greeks were. Movement had to begin somewhere. This was troubling. Form had to be made or not. This was troubling. If all we know is movements, then we know its horizon and its transfiguration in terms of movement too. We cannot imagine something real apart from movements. And hence, our thinking of Genesis, the beginnings, or theosis, the culmination of life, these express unfathomable mysteries for us. And yet the word source, or aitia, source or cause, is peppered throughout our literature. We have to be careful, source or cause. Does it point to something prior to movements that we can know? No, it's not apart from movements, but we can use source or cause to qualify movements. For example, if by source we mean something from something, as something, that enters us into dwelling, into concentration, into clarifying the gift of being. It's straightforward. But if we think of source indicated by of, this enters us into the calling, much more mysterious and yet simple knowledge. It's the meaning of the gift of our being. We are still in movement. Now, perceiving idea, source, or cause in terms of from this from that, or this of that, it's a form of response. It's a form of response. And in fact, all movements is a form of response within the gift of creation. For we enter into the full flow of meaning. We enter into a meaningful world, and it becomes our own. We already are responding. All action is response. And yet we are taught, this is amazing, we are taught that Christ responds with love to his own creation. Christ responds with love to his own creation. We are made as and of Christ. And therefore, the fullness of created response becomes a participation in the fullness of love offered by Christ's uncreated response to his own creation. This means that response really is co-response. We are co-responding with the love of Christ to his creation. All of our actions are response. Therefore, response provides the horizon of meaning for our experience. How we respond to something we undergo, that provides the horizon of meaning. If response provides the horizon of meaning, co-response becomes the transfiguration of the horizon of meaning of our experience. We co-respond. This idea of co-response is such a beautiful mystery. Now, this idea of experience and response providing the horizon of meaning for our dwelling. This is the language of kataphasis. This phrases the concentration of our being. Kataphatic movement or language provides clarity for our attempts to conform to Christ, to dwell with each other, the circular movements, to realize and live our own as his own. Kataphasis. It blesses the gift of being. When we think of experience and co-response, though, not just the response which gives us the horizon of meaning, but the co-response which enters us into the kind of loving gift of being itself. That's apophatic movement, apophatic language. And where kataphasis phrases the concentration of our being, the drawing within of our being, apophasis phrases the transfiguration of our being. Kataphasis, the word kata means something like according to or from, right? You say kata David go, according to David go, blah, blah, blah. Kata Ziziulis, according to Ziziulis, blah, right? Kataphatic movements, phrasing, is thankfulness for the gift of being. Apophatic, or apophasis, provides room, clearing for our calling, for our transformation, for the direct movements. And apophatic movements means not according to or from, but it is from within, with, through, and beyond. From within, with, through, and beyond. All as of one movement. They're not sequenced. It's not from within first and then with and then through. From within, with, through, and beyond, all in one movement. From within, with, through, beyond. A kind of concrete example of this at this point. We read St. Gregory Palamas's text in defense of those who practice stillness. And he begins by saying, prayer is from within the gift of our being, with our body, through our shared struggle, and beyond the gift of our own created being, all at once, right? It doesn't leave the body behind. It doesn't negate it. From within our body, our physical person, with the movement of our being, through and beyond. In terms of etymology, kata kind of means moving towards, from here to there, or as. It's an aesthetic word. It gives us the world of form and sense. Right? It's very beautiful. Apo means something like moving outward, moving away from, or gathering the energy of. Kataphasis, in its thankfulness for creation, is a form of watchfulness. Apophasis, in its gratitude for transfiguration, is a form of desire. And it's interesting that that text of ours, in the center of our tradition, the philokalia, the love of the beautiful, of the neptic fathers, of the watchful fathers, that's right here, kataphatic, the apophatic movement of the kataphatic discipline. If you look up apophasis, and we have even back as far as Aristotle, English translation, I don't know why, tend to translate it as a form of negation. It doesn't make any sense when you look at it, but it's frequent enough that this work is going to have to be done from the beginnings till now, right? It's fair enough. Let's have some examples. A theological example, apotheosis, of the very deity, of the highest. Philosophical, aphorism, apo-horizon, gathered from the horizon. Or even apologia, of the essence of the logos, apo, from my logos, from my reasoning. Here is the gift of my reasoning. One could go on. In fact, it's hard to think of a word which is negative with that construction. Aporia, maybe, probably. But to circle back to aphorism, another insight. Aphorism, or the aspects of aphorism, are horizon and emphasis, right? If you're gathering something from the horizon of meaning, you're emphasizing it. Emphasis, apophasis, kataphasis, same thing. Emphasis means, it's like ecstasy, means to stand out. But emphasis, this is emphasis within an horizon. Apophasis, or aphorism rather, means emphasis within an horizon. And I really like this phrase because it means when we select or choose or narrow down, the rest isn't negated. That's just our emphasis within the whole horizon of beautiful meaning. And so drawing something near doesn't negate or disdain other things or the rest. It's just emphasis. And here too, we understand horizon as a form of truth. Within the horizon of Christ, all is beautiful. Any emphasis within the horizon of Christ is beautiful. Your emphasis might differ from mine, but within the horizon, it is all good. Horizon is given by ground and measure. How we stand, how we perceive, gives us the extent, gives us the horizon. Our ground, source of our being, and our measure, the mode of our being, is Christ. Christ is also the horizon of our being. Our telos, the fullness of us, the fullness of our personhood is to be as Christ, and of Christ. And this fullness, or this completion of our being, is a movement of concentration, not time. Time doesn't define meaning or truth or being for us. And this is a very hard thing to realize, because our culture in our part of the world right now thoroughly idolizes time. Time is gathered in rhythm. Rhythm is time concentrated, and therefore rhythm is the transformation of time. But not time, concentration. We are gathered in fullness as his own and of his own. This is a concentration of our logos unto his logos. The movement inwards is the movement outwards. The imagery, the art of imagery, I guess, in the church, iconography, depicts transfiguration. But icons are in the mode of concentration. You see them gathering unto, and you see them gathering unto the logos of Christ in that scenario. Icons concentrates unto simplicity. They concentrate things, and so they clarify our dwelling, our circular movement. I think this is what is meant when Maximus said, the icon is our mode of knowing now. I think he was referring to something like this mode of concentration. Otherwise I don't understand it yet. Maximus also says, aletheia is the fullness of our knowing, the age to come, truth, aletheia. So icon and aletheia here. Aletheia speaks to the clearing of Christ, the calling, the simple beauty of Christ, or that direct movement that Dionysius and Gregory talk about. And the telos of concentration, the fulfillment of concentration, means to partake of the simple beauty of the theos, of the divine. Now, gathering to a kind of close. In all of this, we seek the transfiguration of the person by a prayer, by a communion, by a loving response, by a fellowship. We don't seek the disfiguration or negation of a person through ideas. We have the Greek word for this is prosopon, or that which is essentially oriented and responding to the gift of another. We also use the word personhood in English, but personhood not as a kind of philosophical term or critical term, just as a way of phrasing this mode of being, of loving co-response to the Creator. And the beauty of this Christ-given transformation of the person flows forth from the person's countenance. The person's countenance, that gathering of the light and joy of our being, offered unto the world in loving response. That's our countenance. It's the gift we're offering back to the world of the joy and light of our being. And the light of Christ gleams in every eye, every countenance. Should we not grow myopic to the synergy of God playing in all aspects of creation? And so our countenance casts the light of Christ back onto the world and back onto our companions, sustained by the logos of Christ in all. It's our co-response through the countenance. Even more so, each countenance is ultimately beautiful, ultimately and completely and finally and wholly beautiful, insofar as we live his own as our own. We only become disfigured in our beauty when we begin to estrange ourselves from our own, as it were. When our own is just our own, when we forget about God or the other person, we can begin being defensive or assertive. And there are two ways in which this can go awry, seems to be popular now, are critique and cleverness. Critique. Critique here is a form of arrogation. We place ourselves ahead of or above the tradition. And through the prism of our own passions, we project our fantasies onto it. We look for our own wounds realized elsewhere, and then insist someone fix them. It's a form of kind of critical superiority, looking down on what others are living. It's self-exaltation. But cleverness is also, so there's the critique, the spirit of critique, but cleverness is also a misstep. Cleverness here is a form of usurpation. So if critique is arrogation, cleverness is usurpation. We put ourselves in place of the tradition and use it as our own intellectual weapon to win arguments, to show somebody up, to be in the know when they're not. Cleverness, we use Christ for our own glory, the tradition in Christ. Critique, oddly enough, we set ourselves above the gift of being and think we know better when we should speak cheaply of it. Each of these stances, which seem to me lamentably common, each of these treat tradition as finished, as a fact of history, treat it as over. Its meaning is exhausted and set into formula, and now I can use them. Each also treats tradition as an inert object, a thing to manipulate. If you're clever about tradition, you're not partaking of it. If you're critical of it, you're not participating in it. Right? It removes the very source of meaning from the tradition. We might think about these a little bit, or maybe not. And yet, strong and synergetic currents of meaning flow as ever, strongly. So in our conversations lately, we have been heartened with Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, Dionysius the Areopagite, Maximus the Confessor, Gregory Palamas, Silouan the Aphonite, Sophrony of Sussex. Is he of Sussex? Perhaps. Papadimontes, Bakhtin, Staniloy, Losky, Zizioulis. We have witnesses still, not in this mode of the deadness, but in that mode of living tradition. Oh, thank you. That was a lot.
Thank you, Andrew. It was concentration. It was concentration. But finally done. So I turn to all of you. Are there things you would like to put on the table for us? Responses, perhaps, queries? Your thoughts in light of what Andrew has laid out for us here? Yes, Ted.
This last little bit, Andrew, thank you. Cleverness and critique, that immediately what came to mind was what I'm trying to understand about myself is this, my stage in life and my learning process, that was missed decades ago, really. I realize I'm in this place with an addiction to impress others. And so cleverness and critique both come into play. And I'm realizing more and more, and this will probably be a long journey, but what happens for me, and I think what I identify with in terms of cleverness and critique, and we make then traditions dead, or we've decided the ending of them. I think that's what you were saying there, is I'm realizing that the need to impress those who I'm with makes me non-present to the people that I'm with, because it's all about me, right? The need to impress. And so I'm very struck by this, and it's giving me something new to ponder in all of this, alongside the need to listen through this again when it's done, because this is a delightful learning curve for me, and quite extraordinarily so. Both affirmation and a deep need to concentrate, be attentive to that which this reveals in me. So yeah, I just want to, that very much connects with this struggle with the need to impress those I'm with. Even just unmuting is a confrontation to that. I'm trying to impress you all. No, I'm not. I want to be present. So that's how it's connecting with me. So thank you very much. And my notes, it'll be a while to decipher those. So thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Do you wish to respond at all, Andrew?
Just a little bit, Ted. You indicate, I think, the hardest thing of the whole spiritual life, which is, as soon as we hold something beautiful, we want to show it, but how do we show it without seeming like it's our own, or that's his own, our own? But more to the point, the hardest thing I think I've read in the Desert Fathers, and I forget who wrote it, but it's immediately and indelibly. He said, live as an exile and do not seek to be listened to by anybody. And I thought, wow, especially that second part, because I think a big temptation is, as soon as we have something, we go, yeah, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And then we ruin what we have. But the way you put it was nicely put. But that admonition from the desert just haunts me. Beautiful.
And one other quick thing is just that, yeah, and you said there, when we find something beautiful, we want to share it, because I don't want to suppress this desire to learn and grow or concentrate, or the clear, I love the phrase clearing, that you used in there a couple times, and kind of as opposed to negation. There's something cleared away. Yeah, and I don't want to lose that with the desire to suppress the need to impress, because that's missing the point. So, yeah, thank you for that. That Desert Father thing. Live as an exile, but not desire to be listened to. Is that it?
That's the gist of it. Yeah. To live apart from other people's eyes and don't seek out their ears.
Don't see. Yeah. Thank you.
A little off topic, but with what you said there, Ted, I remember listening online to other debates, like why us Orthodox don't have like those apologetic debates where we argue with other people with other religion. And basically what's said by this other priest, it can be seen as a form of pride. You're trying to tear someone else down. You're not actually leading them towards anything particularly good. You're just trying to pick apart the flaws in their argument. Are you doing it for their own good, or are you actually trying to tear someone else down, which is harming the other person? So this is why we Orthodox, we don't really engage in those debates with other religions, those apologetic debates.
Thanks, Derek. Christian.
Hey. Just a couple of thoughts. I love the idea of doctrine being phrased in terms of clearing, because I think that's what doctrine is and should be, a kind of generative space as opposed to a kind of limiting set of parameters. So I just think that's a really helpful way of phrasing it. The other thing I wanted to say, and admittedly, I will need to listen back. It's 11 p.m. in the UK. I'm rather sleepy.
You're just beginning to dance in the UK, I think.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I know I should be, right. My wife's in Colorado at the moment, and but I've had the two children to myself, so the dancing ceased at about 7 p.m. Anyway, what you were saying, the bits that I managed to really track with, really reminded me of I've been doing a bit of work on Samuel Coleridge, and I'm having to write this essay, and he talks about perception as being something gifted to us as well as something that we shape. And he has this whole very kind of complex sort of idea between primary and secondary imagination things. But anyway, I'm just sharing because I think I can't remember exactly the distinctions you were making, but that weren't actually distinctions, but almost two polarities or two ways of I think of Christ and as Christ. And there's just for me just another way of getting at what I think I've been reading in Coleridge. So I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there and just sharing that, just in case you're interested, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I love Coleridge too. He's always brilliant and profoundly beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
And I trust, Christian, that as this paper you're working on matures, you're going to be sending it our way and send it to Andrew as well. I wanted to read it because we've talked about it a little bit, and I'm sure that Andrew would as well.
Thank you. I was in for this month, a week on Monday, so good. All systems go.
Kendra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for this wonderful learning today. And I too am really excited to perhaps go back and listen again. I have some kids that were coming in mamaing me throughout the talk, but and I apologize for being late. One of the things that I'm have been learning about over the past year to 2 years intentionally is thinking about the idea of apophasis, or this point of view, this I don't want to say point of view because it's a lived out thing. So it's a way of living, a worldview, a lived worldview. How this might allow people who are sure about God to bring that sacred practice of doubt, so that offers us flexibility. And I really loved your contrasting cataphasis and apophasis with forms of watchfulness versus forms of desire. And for me, that was really helpful because as a member of the United Church, I am sort of steeped in this tradition of essential agreement. And so if we can essentially agree with something, you can move forward. And that also means that people's ideas of God and of the Christ and of what it means to live with Christ as a Christian is vastly different. And you could be sitting in the same pew and it would be completely different. And so thinking about apophasis for me as a form of openness, flexibility, and reconciliation, not just with God, but within the community that God calls us to, is a really compelling idea. And I'm just wondering if, I mean, in my mind, as you went through your lecture to the seminar today, and I was just really taken back to the idea of movement, having a movement within, becoming a movement without. And in a denomination like the United Church, we're often considered quite wishy-washy on theology. And in this, I'm wondering if maybe someone, yourself, Dr. Bingham, can offer a little bit of insight on perhaps what it might mean, or what enlightenment or openness might come from wishing and washing to and from cataphasis in a denomination of folks or a community of folks who are kind of scared of talking about doctrine, who are kind of scared of giving up the culture of a church for, you know, seeking God. If that, does that make sense? Ish. So that's my question about being wishing and washing between cataphatic ways of living into the culture of a church, but being compelled toward an apophatic path personally.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. At risk of speaking, no, at risk of speaking about an experience I don't know, let me turn to Goa for the moment and just think a little bit more about your because I am largely unaware of much of what is going on or said in the United Church right now. Cataphasis doesn't mean setting down ideas, and apophasis means letting go of ideas. It's not like that. One's not confining and one's free. And that's not what you were saying. But yeah. Let me
I
think
can
more.
give you a little more time to think.
Please.
So nice to see you, Kendra. And what you walk around there is, I think, so important. Part of what strikes me just as background to it is in 1925, when the leadership of Presbyterians, Methodists, Congregationalists sat down together, and for reasons which had perhaps more to do with economic necessity, having all these churches competing with each other in small towns throughout Alberta, they realized that they had more common interest in their way of gathering faithful in those communities. They had a common interest around that, and that perhaps they could set aside both their particular forms of church polity as well as their theological accents. And at least as the bit that I understand of this, it led to a kind of rule of thumb, which was we will be careful not to walk into the theological waters. Rather, we will seek what practically we can do together that will be useful for the life of the world. And in my own view, the United Church, I've said this to you before, the United Church has carried way too much of the water in Canadian society around social justice issues. What I wonder about in just your way of raising this, and I think I understand what you're what you're pondering here. And this, of course, is for you to ponder. And I mean, you've been pondering it, and I really laud the way you're pondering it. I wonder if, when it comes to your beloved community and what Andrew's had to say, if perhaps there wouldn't be a little more resonance in hymnology, certainly in the way in which we hear in the Wesleys, for example, the way in which they hear, or the way in which they, and also their setting of the Psalms and their setting of some of the texts of the patristics, the way in which they seek to speak of the mystery of God, seek to speak of the presence of God unfolding, as it says in one of Wesley's remarkable hymns, and sanctify to me my deepest distress. And sanctify to me my deepest distress. That seems to me to be where this sense of how Andrew has laid out apophasis and cataphasis, the way in which they dance together. Because in fact, this is all about how they dance together. It's not about how they, it's not even about how they accent something different. It's about how this is the dance of our being, which is becoming, which is unfolding. And having a language for that is certainly a great gift. And my sense is, just off the top here with you, that some of the language for that exists in the hymnology, that at least your tradition has historically held dear. I don't know how dear it is now, but it has held it dear. And also, again, to come back to the bit that I know about your work, I mean, you are seeking to think through this and find some ways. That's where your question comes to Andrew. Find some ways to speak a word into your community, and perhaps help them understand that there's a deep well that they can draw upon here, which is the well of the patristic tradition and its thinking, its sensibilities, what it calls us to, because of course that belongs to you as much as it does to anybody in the Orthodox Church. It's insight into our human nature and our human personhood and our human relationships. Andrew, have you been able to think about this a little bit? So,
No, that's nicely put. That's very nicely put. Yeah.
Kendra, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciated the nuanced understanding that the apophatic and cataphatic paths and ways of being and believing and loving are entwined. As there's a lot of in the literature and some of the things that I've been reading, there's a lot of oppositional, I suppose, placing them at opposites, placing them in conflict even. And I think that for me, the idea of the apophatic path is that the opposite doesn't really exist. You know, there are no complete things. There are no completely separate entities, that we all are sort of, as we come back around within our thinking, within our living, within our loving, within our seeking God, we understand that there is something beyond our ability to distinguish between elements, between events, that there's something that is holding it together. And part of my work, I have an ulterior motive, as always. My ulterior motive in doing some of this work and trying to not just understand the apophatic path, but to understand in an embodied way what it might mean to live into it, is that I believe that part of what is holding many people in my community back from true reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, with climate justice, I'm full disclosure, I'm the justice minister for my region in the church. But a lot of this work that we are called to be in relationship with God, with God's creation, with the Christ, is to do some of this work to ensure that we are healing the cosmos rather than continuing on and just looking at healing ourselves. And so part of what I see happening, unfolding, is that we are too, particularly in the United Church, perhaps particularly in the west of Canada, we are too concerned with what we are sure about, to be able to release and move into something that is unknown or unknowable with faith. And part of that is being so bound to a church culture and to an image that we've given ourselves of who we are, rather than being open to listening and living with God in relationship, where we can receive and offer ourselves freely without having so many filters of who we ought to be, what we ought to be doing, how we ought to be acting. And so I really appreciate this new learning for me, that the cataphatic and apophatic paths are, of course, intertwined, and there is so much room for growth in the in-between spaces. So thank you so much for this.
Just one more note. Thank you again, Kendra. So I didn't emphasize this in the talk because I wanted to not have it framed this way. Two insights with which this whole thing began were apophasis cannot mean negation. Just can't. It won't somehow. And the other was about the aesthetic and the noetic being as one. The apophatic is not different than sureness. It's not different than certainty. It's not a healing of doctrine. It doesn't play on those terms. If you think that there's something like sureness or certainty in the doctrine, then there's another thing, that's already to be misperceiving the world. That's why we tried to cast it in terms of movement, and why, as David just reminded us, it's a dance together. So it doesn't begin or end with sureness. It's not of that order. Sureness is as different, to this as a tin box. It doesn't play in it. Aesthetic, aesthesis, A-E-S-T-H, not aesthetic. That's the first thing. So there's not something certainty that some people are in that we have to avoid to be free. That's mistaken from the beginning. It's overturning that whole thing, which begins with a bifurcation into some good, some bad. And often, and I don't know why, but in the whole course of thought, as far as I can tell, apophasis is mistaken as negation, and cataphasis is mistaken as positive. But positive and negative language are both cataphatic. They both speak to clarifying the gift, the transformation of the gift of life, which is what apophasis, names for us or clears or phrases for us, is a deep mystery. They belong together. They're not different, but neither have any relation at all to certainty. So, thank you again. David?
maybe
last
if you're,
thoughts? Oh, go on.
maybe if you're, I mean, I just want to follow up on part of what Kendra was walking around. And you said a little bit about this almost well, just in passing, Andrew, but I wonder if this isn't part of the pastoral challenge here. And it's very good to see Kendra knitting, because I know when you're knitting, you are in the process of bringing the threads together. And it also does invite you to the danger of dropping a stitch. So what I wonder about, and I don't want to get carried away with this, and it's entirely up to both of you whether this is helpful or not. It seems to me that one of the great gifts of our religious communities when they take on the mantle of justice is that they are concerned about the healing of the world. And that is a very significant matter. Jesus Christ healed. He blessed and he healed. But part of that healing, at least it seems to me, when we see it in the Gospels, part of that healing, if I've understood in any way those extraordinary narratives, is that Jesus Christ never believed the identity that was offered by the people who were suffering and seeking healing, and who saw themselves through the identity of their suffering and the identity of their, what the culture saw them as. It seems to me he didn't buy it. That is, he didn't resist it either. He actually did something else. He responded to them as the image and likeness of God. And that transformed their self-understanding. It meant they no longer understood themselves as the blind man, the crippled man who couldn't get into the pool of Bethesda, the woman accused, the Samaritan woman. It seems to me that we see in those narratives a response that's coming from someplace else. It's coming from this way in which, as Andrew has laid out, where the apophatic and the kataphatic are dancing together. It's drawing them towards a transformation of their way of understanding themselves. So I wonder if part of what you are wondering about here, Kendra, is finding a language or ways of not buying in to the language of identity politics, which certainly on the surface appears to be a good and righteous thing and just thing to care about. But when that frames our response, we're still, it seems to me, maybe stuck in the same place.
I'm just wondering, like, Kendra, it's good to see you again. I kind of wrote your question because as a Lutheran who's now in the United Church and sometimes wrestling with ideas of ministry, this whole question of essential agreement, which sometimes feels to me like I cross my fingers so I can just admit something and not really agree with it at all. I kind of paraphrased your question. I just wanted to hear your response. How might the concepts and ideas of cataphasis and apophasis illumine theology, and theology understood as faith-seeking understanding, in the United Church of Canada? Is that a fair condensation of your question?
I think so, and I think a part of that is to how might exploring faith, theology, living out of faith in our communities through this lens of understanding apophasis and cataphasis, how might that allow people to challenge their own assumptions with theology? Because as a denomination without doctrine, necessarily, there is a dearth of opportunity to critically assess why we are the way we are, why we love the way we love, why we believe and inquire the way that we do. And we don't have necessarily, although there was doctrine at the beginning of the church, articles of doctrine at the beginning of the church, they have changed over time. And at this point, our main document is a song of faith and an older creed. And so, yeah, how might engaging in this understanding of the interplay between the two allow people to challenge their own beliefs or inquire critically about their own beliefs in order to promote growth and connection with God in community? That wasn't as concise as what you said, Niels, but I would put that on the end.
I mean, I think we almost shifted this conversation from Orthodoxy to the United Church.
No, you haven't. This is
Yeah,
an issue
but I
at
mean,
the heart. This is an issue at the heart of our society and also at the heart of the human mind and the human heart. So,
yeah, but I think specifically within the United Church of Canada, I mean, it's approaching its 100th anniversary, which it's being grandly celebrated next year. But I think there is this tendency not to look earlier than 1925, and I think that's part of what's leading perhaps to some of the spiritual malaise within the United Church, where how do you draw that forward and inform what the United Church does, and maybe teach the people in the pews that there's a history that this draws upon, that in 1925 the people knew about, but in 2024, 2025 people may not know about.
part of it, I'd like to hear Andrew respond as well if he wishes. But part of what I would wonder about, Kendra, in your last response here to Niels, and that was nice, Niels, the way you summarized that. Maybe the word challenge is the wrong word. Maybe the word challenge keeps one stuck in the same habit of mind. And I think what Andrew has laid out for us here is, it's not about whether it's different. It's not even about whether it's better. It's not that. It's pointing to a deep part of how a deep part of the idolatries of our mind, which is to see these dimensions of our mind and our experience and of what the tradition teaches. It's a habit of mind which sees them as distinct from each other and doesn't help us recognize that there's a different dance that we can enter into. And that different dance has different music, different steps, and it doesn't divide the world in that way. But that's a big conversation. Any final remarks, Andrew? You're silenced, Andrew.
Thank you. No final remarks, just to thank you for that lovely image with which we can end. Let's pause here.
Thank you, Kendra.